Great. So good morning, everybody. And thank you for joining us today for this event. Today we are going to virtually visit Estonia as part of the FAIRsFAIR National Roadshow series. The series is part of the outreach program of the FAIRsFAIR project, and they've been set up and organized to try and speed up the adoption of FAIR practices and the share ideas and debate around the uptake of a FAIR approach in research environments across European countries. The event today is organized in collaboration with the University of Tartu and DataCite Estonia Consortium. So we are very pleased to have you here. And I am Sara Pittonetta. I'm the outreach manager of FAIRsFAIR, and I'll happy to welcome you today. So you can see the agenda, I hope, in front of you. I'll soon give the floor to the organizers of the event. So I'll give the floor to Liisi Lämpinen for an official opening of the event, and then we'll have the pleasure to have a keynote speech by Anne Vanet from the University of Paris, Vice President of Digital Transformation of Open Science, that will guide us a bit towards open science from theory to practice, bringing in the France use case. I'll give then the floor to Marian Grothwell from DANS and representing the FAIRsFAIR project as well, who'll have an interactive session with you that will help you understand what FAIRsFAIR is doing. And then will be a turn of Josephine Nordling from CSC, and again representing the FAIRsFAIR project, that will present how the project is supporting data repositories in the uptake of FAIR principles. We'll then have a short break, and then Claudia Hengelhardt from the University of Göttingen will introduce the approach of FAIR towards high education institutes. So presenting how FAIRsFAIR worked to get FAIR into university curricula and the teaching environment. Then Marian will be back and with you an hands-on exercise on how to improve fairness of your data. And then Birgit Schmidt from, again, the University of Göttingen and OpenAIR will present the Enlight University Alliance. That's it. So feel free to use the chat if you have any questions, or raise your hand. The speakers will be happy to accommodate your questions and needs, and the materials will be then shared online from the presentation as well as the recordings of this meeting. Liisi, the floor to you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I hope you can see my screen. So I'm Liisi Lämpinen. I usually forget to introduce myself in this event. So I'm very happy to welcome you all here. Some of you tend to attend our events every year. We always do one event in the fall and one event in the spring. So this is this year's Open Science Fall event for Estonia. And we are really happy that FAIRsFAIR approached us and asked if you would want to be part of their series. And of course, we agreed. So I'll give you a really short introduction and welcome. Some people have asked me, what is FAIR and what is this event all about? So I'm hoping most of you know what FAIR means. Or FAIR data principles is the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusability of research data. So if any of you are dealing with research data, or if you're supporting scientists or researchers who deal with data and now they are asked to make their data fair, then these are the principles what the FAIR stands for. I put a couple of links down there. Most of them, maybe you have heard about GoFair, who's really in detail explains about what the FAIR principles are. And also some of you may have actually had funding from European Union, and there are the FAIR principles mentioned too. So what's the goal of this event today? First of all, we try to increase your knowledge. So if you don't know that much about FAIR, so hopefully by the end of the day or after these 2.5 hours, you'll know more. We've asked some people to be very practical and give us things that you can use if you deal with data, and how to make sure your data is fair, or how to make your data more fair. And also we've asked Anne from France to give us a really best practice way how they have dealt with an open science in general. Because I hope you all know that France is one of the countries that actually have the open science policy, which we are aiming towards. Also, we hope that by the end of the day, you'll know some of the faces either here or in Europe now, that if you need any help when it comes to FAIR or data management or any of these open science areas, you know who to turn to. And the bigger picture of why we are doing this thing also is, since Estonia is developing the open science framework, which will be part of the legal system, then you'll have this background too, because FAIR is mentioned there as well. So a little bit where to find help inside Estonia. So what we are doing, Estonian libraries, universities, also DataCite Consortium in Estonia, which connects 4 major universities. So basically any kinds of information, research, data management training, data management plans, any questions about data repositories, DOIs, if your research data needs DOIs, or even open access publishing, you can turn to different people in different universities. First of all, you can find contacts through DataCite Estonia Consortium. You can turn to your university libraries who have special people for that. And also some of you who have been in our previous events, they know that we have started the open science movement, so to say. We have the branding for Estonian open science, and there's a website that we are developing, and hopefully this will be at some point in next few years first place to go website in Estonia when it comes to open science. So a little bit of practical information, some of it Sarah already mentioned. We ask you to keep your cameras and microphone closed during the presentations. If you want to ask something or comment something, please raise your hand or use the chat function. And then when you raise your hand, you can then turn on your cameras and the microphones when you want to ask a question. Also, the event will be recorded, so please keep that one in mind, and later the recording will be shared. You'll get the direct email after the event, but also you can then share with other people who couldn't attend today. And also we ask you to be active. We have various Menti questions coming to your way. You can see it in the bottom. There's a code already in every slide that I have. So so please be active and answer these when we let you know when it's the time to answer the next question. So here's one more time the code. So write it down or just log in there already right now. You should see it. And I want to thank FAIRsFAIR for approaching us and coming to Estonia. We've done this thing with RDA once, that when RDA came to Estonia, and now FAIRsFAIR is in Estonia. And thank you everybody who were willing to present. I'm really happy to see you all here. And a special thanks to the French Embassy too, who helped me to get the connection with that. And for the participants, please enjoy your the workshop and the half of the day with us. And I will stop sharing now. And so before I'll give the floor to Anne, we would like to try this these Mentimeter questions. So we have question 1 for you, and we would be really interested who you are, who is here with us today. So you can tell who you are or where you work, you know, whatever is the most appropriate for you. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that, and then you can see the answers here already. it seems that in general, mostly 3 groups are represented. We have researchers, we have librarians, and research support people here. So half of people have answered, so I'll give you another 10 seconds and then we can close this question. Okay, great. Christian just wrote in the chat. He's a research scientist too. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we can now move on with our presentation. So first, I'll give the floor to Anne Vanette, who's from University of Paris. The good thing about Anne is she has been really closely connected to this open science policy that France has now. So she's been helping to make it happen. And the other part, good thing about Anne is that she's also a researcher. So she can give us both angles of the coin, because sometimes us who try to support researchers, we have a hard time understanding the researchers and the other way around. So she's 2 people in one. So Anne, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
That you can see the screen?
Yes.
Yes, it's okay. Then first, a big thank you to invite me here. I'm so happy to be in Europe with you. It's very important, and especially in Estonia, because you are so east and we are so west, that Europe it's just behind you and us, which is just great today. A big thank you to FAIRsFAIR also, because they make a so great job that they have to be here, especially for research data opening. I'm Anne Vanette, and I'm a teacher and a researcher in computer biology. Actually, I'm working on virus and more especially in RNA virus, which is very important right now with the COVID story. I'm also a vice president for digital transformation and open science in the University of Paris, which I think it's 2 very connected purpose. Then I don't think that France is an example, not at all, but we did some different stuff, and I can share that with you. And I will try to put in front of the French policy what we did in the University of Paris to try to follow this policy. Then first, why open science is important for me, at least. Funding of research versus research itself change the researcher's position. Actually, now there is more competition rather than collaboration, and more closure rather than sharing. Then what is the effect on researcher creativity, and thus what is the hope of a bright future? And I think research is a value to humanity and not just a bargaining chip with money inside. Then a little summary, very quickly, a small introduction on open science, and then a French history about open science, which is very short, and IT. Then a focus on the national French plan for open science, the number 2, because we met 2 already, and what we did in University of Paris, and then a take-home message, usually around Europe, because I am a big fan of Europe. First, open science, as Europe said usually, has to be as open as possible and as close as necessary. Okay, under the umbrella of open science, there is, of course, there is, of course, open access, open source, and open data, but there is also participative science, open laboratory netbook, citizen science, open research, open innovation, and even now open educational resources. Then how to be as open as possible and as close as necessary. That is not very easy with all these different purposes. Then a little history that you can understand where we are in France. We began the digital transformation a very long time ago in the 60s, but we stopped very long time ago also in the 80s. We just create a national researcher center for IT, and then we go to other policy and stop this development. And you have to wait until 2016 to see the law for a digital republic. That's just to tell you that this history is very short. This law was very important because the government asked to put all the national and public data open, and also the software that makes this data. Right after, we wrote the first national plan for open science. And just after, 1 year after, the National Center for Scientific Research, which is a CNRS in France, wrote a global roadmap. And just 1 year after, again, a global roadmap, especially for data. And then there is a few months ago, we wrote all together the second national open science plan, which I will call PNSO2. Then what is inside this PNSO2? Actually, there is 4 different paths, which are not very innovative. Actually, the first one is about open access. The second about open data. The third one, perhaps more innovative, it's about source code and software. And then the last one is how to transform this practice for the researchers itself. Then I will go through these 4 paths. The first one about open access is first an obligation. We have to publish in open access, especially the results coming from publicly funding research area. Then what we did and how that is possible. That's the practice part of the talk. Actually, we made a national French platform for open access, and the CNRS and the Pasteur Institute put that in the evaluation of the researchers. If you don't put your article on this platform on open access, you cannot be evaluated on that research. In the University of Paris, when I wrote up its University of Paris, it made me smiling to put up, we try to have one reference from open science by laboratory, and this reference can help all the researchers of the lab to put the article on that open access platform. I forgot to tell you that I send to Lizzie this PNSO2 English version, and like that, if some of this sentence is important for you, you can go to see inside this plan how we wrote the entire stuff, because here it's really just a summary. Second one, we want to support the diamond model, which is not easy at all, because if some experimentation on this diamond model in France was done, we feel that it's very difficult to go from experiments to the real industrialization of this diamond model. Then in the association that we call UDIS, that is a French association where we have put all the more intensive research university. We are 10 inside this association, and we think that we have to be all together to try to build this diamond platform. And I even feel that we should have one at the level of Europe Even there is already one for the people that went an ERC. I think we have to make one more open for everyone. Then the third point is to encourage the multilingualism and the circulation of scientific knowledge, and especially in the European languages. I can give you a little example, but first I would like to say that in my university we have a linguistic laboratory trying to work on semi-automatic translation. And just this example, pourquoi devrais-je parler en anglais quand je pourrais parler en français et que ce soit traduit directement en estonien pour vous? I don't know if the translation is very good and I love your language because it's so different that our languages. But I wrote these two sentences and there is no English in that slide, and now it's very easy to do it even by voice and not just writing it. And especially after this Brexit story, perhaps we'll really go in that direction. And let's go to the second pass about research data. Again, an obligation, and it's to disseminate data, especially when it's publicly funded results. And for that, again, the CNRS make his own research data plan, as I told you previously already. For that, we are creating a national data platform. As I told you previously, we create an open access platform. Now we are creating a national data platform. It should open in March 2022, that in a few months. We are, my university are in the steering committees, but there is also a lot of other universities trying to be very near the ministry to create this platform. Is not to replace the open already creating platform, is just to make one for those that don't have any national data platform, and perhaps to make also a catalog of all the other platform existing in open dataverse. Then, and now it's, I'm sure, very important for the FAIRsFAIR Roadshow, we want to encourage the researchers to know what is a data life cycle and what is the FAIR principle for these data. And for that, we try to not to make really an obligation, because when you don't know what it is, you can make any obligation, it's difficult to follow it. But we try to make a lot of formation, especially in the university for doctorants and for the new researchers. We try also to make a group of thinking on data and research data, mixing people from everywhere in the faculties, but also in the institute and in the different offices of the university. And the last stuff that I try to do right now is to create a cross-functional services for open science and digital technology. In this service, we would like to put people for librarian, but also people from IT and people from archive and people knowing juridic problem. And like that, to have just a unique point that the researchers could reach to have a plethoric answer to their unique questions. Then the third pass was about source code. First, we don't want to make an obligation as the first two pass, but at least to recognize and support the open source license of softwares, again, especially for the publicly funded research results, and highlight this production, because for this moment, right now for me, for example, I'm working in computational biology. I write a lot of software on RNA viruses, and I just write my software as a piece of paper, and just the results are important, and my software, I just keep it for myself, and I'm not evaluate on it. And perhaps it could be nice to have them publish, or even share them if they can be useful for other people. Then we are very happy to have here in our university a researchers that the name is Di Cosmo, Roberto Di Cosmo, and he creates software heritage, which is a library of source code, and it's now worldwide known. And then you can put your source code inside this software heritage library. Then it is also a problem of policy, and we would like to define and promote the open source software policy. Then the last part is to transforming practices, and we would like to try to put open science as the default principle, which is not really easy, because for this moment it's still difficult for the researchers to follow these principles. Then we would like to develop and value in the career pathways, but also in education for students and for research staffs, making here clear for everyone in the universities that open science is important and not just for researchers. Again, we make half-day formations, and we try to give this important information by the referent in each lab of the university. After that, we would like to value open science by the diversity of scientific productions. We did that about researchers, because I spoke about that since the beginning of my presentation. But we could also value open science and the scientific production through the projects and also the organization. Then for that, we make a working group to share between the different intensive researchers universities in France through this UDIS association. We make a working group about open science to share the practice of the university. And in my university, we put a prize for open science initiatives. Then you know that it's a problem of person, of work, but also of budget. And France, for the last PNSO, tripled the budget of open science and put that in the National Fund from Open Science. And actually, to tell you some money story, in my university, we put 1 million euros dedicated to open science on the 3 last years. Then I am at the end of the presentation. I don't know, I didn't take the time to see if there was question or not, but perhaps before answering your question, I would like to give you the take-home message, which is very, very important for me. Always believe that we are stronger together. It's not something very easy to say, especially in the world that we are living in this moment. And I think that collaboration, especially at the European level, for more scientific creativity and more human welfare is so important. Actually, the role of Europe is central to show a socially bearable way. It has always been true in its history. And actually, Estonia and France embrace Europe between their 2 arms. Then I'm sure we can trust each other. This message may seems very, very candid, but I don't think that at all, because our world, which is facing so many problems, ecological, energy, migration, climate, do we have any other path that we could take than trust each other? Thank you a lot, and Aita.
Thank you, and that was wonderful, especially the very positive message in the end. We can do it all together. So does anybody have a question for Anne or a comment? I don't see anything in the chat either. I put the link to French National Plan for Open Science in the link, so if anybody wants to see that more in details. I do have a question, unless somebody else has one. So out of these 4 different topics that you just covered, which required the most work? You know, which is the hardest to achieve?
The last one, which is transforming the mind of researchers. In France, it begins to change, but the researchers think that open science is something very difficult, taking time, something to make in parallel of research work, and it's a pain for them. Now they begin to understand that there is a problem of publishing and money with publishing. They also understand that perhaps they have such a big ego that they prefer to give money to have their name on the publication. And they begin to think that research is perhaps not exactly that. But still, they don't have a lot of time, and they don't want to put them by make a lot of paper to inform open science stuff. That I think it's really the people changing mind, which is a more difficult path to do.
Okay, thank you for this, and thank you again for your presentation and being here. I see Sophia Rost has a question, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for this lovely presentation. I'm from Germany, Sophia, from the University of Potsdam, and I wonder how your university, what's the financial situation to support this open science things you want to install? Does your university gives that extra amount of money to realize that, or how you do this?
Yeah, actually, you know, in France, we are changing the mode of giving money to university, because in France we got, you know, we are always very different from the rest of the world, and like that, nobody can understand anything that is developing in France. And actually, we have this different research institute, National Research Institute. We have not just the CNRS, we have plenty of them, and we have also plenty of university, at least 90 different universities, and for the entire world, it was not understandable. Then the government tried to change that and told to the university, please do whatever you want, but we want that there is 10 major intensive research university, and for that we will give you money. And then since 15 years, we are trying to merge university, to make big university, to be in these 10 more intensive university. Then we won the stuff, and we merged 2 different universities. And for that, the government gave us money. And from this money, we put this money, not just in open science, but a part of the money of this money in open science.
That's good then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we can move on now. So next I'll ask Marianne Grootveld to speak about what's FAIRsFAIR about, because this is the reason why we're here today. So please, Marianne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. And thank you very much, everyone attending this event and coming to listen and to join the roadshow. Let me tell a bit about this project called FAIRsFAIR. And I'll start, of course, here in Estonia. Sarah already introduced the workshops series, the roadshow series, and I'll tell a bit more about the project in general. I work at DANS, Data Archiving and Network Services in the Netherlands, and I'm part of this project, as you understand. you see here some basic information about the projects. We started already a while ago, so we started our last 6 months right now, and it's funded by the European Commission. It's one of the Horizon 2020 projects. We have 6 core partners. Some of them are here today as well. For instance, CSC in Finland, Trust IT, represented by Sarah, the European University Association, the Digital Curation Center in the UK, and STFC also in the UK. These are core partners, but in total, we have 22 partners. And that links, for instance, also to our colleagues, Birgit and Claudia from Göttingen University. You see DataCite, you see the Research Data Alliance. So we try to be very broad. We have a lot of input from different angles and countries. We have, of course, an objective as a project, and that is to promote and foster fair data practices. FAIR became known 7 years ago as a set of principles for data. But the move from principles to practice is not that obvious. And this project really focuses on putting the practices into place in the various disciplines and cultures. Culture is a key word in this context. It's not so much about technology, it is also about willing coalitions, so to speak, making data fair, understanding what it entails if you want to make your data reusable, and on the other side, to reuse data that others made. And I think it's a bit of culture change we need in the same spirit as open science movement needs that. And of course, we see already a lot of good examples. So these good practices, we try to encourage and to enlarge and share with others. A more formal formulation of our objective is to realize the goals of the European Open Science, cloud in particular, by opening up and sharing knowledge, expertise, guidelines, lots of initiatives on fair matters in the broad sense. And very specifically, we build on a set of recommendations and an action plan that was published in 2018 by the expert group on fair data, with the title Turning Fair into Reality. That is good guidance for us. The European Open Science Cloud is huge, and this is one impression of what's going on there. And it's also an impression for us as a project of the parties and initiatives and projects that we try to collaborate with, and where we want to know what they are doing in the area of supporting FAIR and how we can join forces. For instance, at the right-hand column, starting at the top, you see projects like OpenAIR and EU Data and Archive, and the RDA again. So cross-disciplinary initiatives, research infrastructures. Below them, you see a couple of discipline-specific clusters, like SHOC for the social sciences and humanities, or PANOSC for photon and neutron research, and many other FAIR-related initiatives below that. In the middle column, we have the really European level, so the association of the European Open Science Cloud, the steering board. There is an advisory board. A set of task forces is kicking off at the moment on various topics. There is this whole governance and operations area. And then finally, in the left-hand column, you see FAIRsFAIR and a couple of its sibling projects. We sometimes call them, because we were all funded from the same funding call. One of them is EOSC Nordic. So we have Josephine in the room today, who also works in that project. And with these sibling projects, we share a couple of task forces, for instance, also about fair data and fair infrastructures. So this is roughly the landscape we're collaborating with in the FAIRsFAIR project. And we know there is much more around, so no worries about that, but yeah, sometimes you have to focus. What we do as a project, and in particular in our synchronization force, which is a subset of team members, we've organized 3 workshops in the last years, 1 per year. The last 2 years we did it virtually in a couple of online sessions. And we took as a starting point this earlier report from 2018, Turning FAIR into Reality, which contains 27 recommendations clustered in these 6 clusters you see here. I realized it's too small printed for you to read, but in case you know the original report, you might recognize the structures. And what we did is for each of these recommendations, ask a large set of FAIR stakeholders, project initiatives, what they do towards implementing that recommendation. And we had a kind of snapshot of activities. We've done that this year and the year earlier, so we can see some progress. On the other hand, the bar has been raised because over time we do expect more progress and we do expect to see more fair behavior and fair output. So it's not necessarily going up, but at least we try to bring together these initiatives. A good point, of course, in these workshops is that we learn about many angles and we see many examples, and people can really also enlarge their network through that. But that's just one part of the things we do as a project. On our website, you can find these topics. And here you will find, of course, more information. Too much for me to go into it in more detail, but we try to support others in their FAIR activities, for instance, by supporting organizations in the data policy. We have a policy support program. We support data repositories in pretty close contact. The FAIR landscape also includes education and training and curriculum for data stewards and others working in supporting researchers and scientists. We have some tools and software. I'll tell more about assessment metrics later on. In our Competence Center, you find pointers to training, but there's also a forum for asking questions and answering things. And of course, we have a set of events and activities. Apart from the roadshow, we have quite a good number of webinars, and the recordings are available on the website. Underlying all these activities and things are is the content that you can find in our area on Zenodo. I think we nearly have 150 items in that community. So please take some time if you're interested to know more about that. This is, in essence, a boring and internal image. So for you, it's hardly relevant how many work packages we have, but I'm using it as a kind of landscape again to tell that we look into data policy and practice. That is a work package where, for instance, Claudia is involved and I'm involved. Josephine too. We work on repositories and help them to get certified as trustworthy repositories. Josephine will also talk more about repositories across projects, actually. We have work packages on FAIR Competences and FAIR data science curriculum. Well, that's Claudia again. We have the typical work packages for project management and engagements. You already know Sara is our outreach manager, so that's work package 5 for you. And I hope you'll, during the course of this event, you get a clear idea of how we try to promote FAIR in all kinds of directions and for all these types of stakeholders. Let me now stop sharing this and share the Mentimeter with you again. So if you can go back to the Mentimeter, and if one of the colleagues could please repeat the Mentimeter code in the chat, just to make sure that you can find it. We are still on the previous slide.
I put the code in a chat.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me then give you the next question. Is this idea of fair data clear enough for you? This is looking great. Or maybe there is an interesting connection between people who respond fast and fair. I think we're good 40 people in the room, so there might be more opinions. Okay, I think this is a pretty impressive score. I hesitate. I tend to ask the person who selected no to ask you if you can share with us what is not clear so far. On the other hand, I know I'm putting you very much on the spot, so if you want to remain anonymous and not speak up, I also understand, but this could be an opportunity to just share what you find troubling and maybe someone can help you. So I'll just see if a hand will be raised. But I don't think so. And then let's move on to the next question. It's slightly different, but I think also part of today's program. We have many researchers in the room and research scientists and also support staff who I assume sometimes advise about repositories. Google, my home repository, the local data manager. Yeah, looking what your funder accepts. With the help of experts in the university library, I asked my colleagues, yeah. Trusted by research, yeah, by research field. The institutional one is free and helps. That is the important addition, I think. You haven't done it yet? No, that's fair. Domain specific is mostly my first choice. That is a nice mixture. You use Zenodo, you use read3data, read3data.org, I think is a very good point to start when you don't have local support to help you. Yeah. I see a lot of university repositories, so many home repositories. And I think that in part also relates to trust mentioned by someone else. But that's me interpreting. Is there anyone who'd like to speak up on their choice? And Doesn't seem like that. Then I'll just leave this on and but stop sharing, and I'll hand back to Lizzie. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Marianne. So if anybody has a question even later, you can just put it in a chat and we'll pick it up and we'll answer it later. So, but now we can move on to Finland, and we'll ask Josephine Nordling to talk about different projects that she is involved in. One is FAIRsFAIR, and the other one that we are connected is through EOSC Nordic, and she can tell what these projects do for FAIR.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Do you now see my presentation all right?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Perfect. So thank you very much for letting me explain what types of support measures we are doing in both FAIRsFAIR project, but also in EOSC Nordic. So both projects are EOSC funded ones, and both have put an extensive amount of effort into supporting both data repositories, but also researchers. And I'm here to present these measures done in these projects. My name is Josephine Nordling. I work at CSC IT Center for Science in Finland. And I work mostly with open science and FAIR initiatives as an open science specialist. So first of all, the most concrete type of support are the series of repository support offered in FAIRsFAIR project, which are focused on various topics, as you can see in the list above. In the list below, you can see some of the ones that that are coming up potentially shortly. So we only have the themes, but we haven't yet decided on the exact dates of these, but you are able to check from the FAIRsFAIR website for further information, and once we have the dates, we will publish them there at that website in the link below the picture there. The scope of data repository support lies both on direct engagement with the repositories, but also on providing various forms of support materials. And we have formed a so-called support program for this. Concretely, what we want to achieve is to assist repositories in becoming FAIR enabling with FAIR data holdings. That sounds really nice, doesn't it? This means for the repositories to become so-called trustworthy repositories, supporting FAIR data access, interoperability of datasets, and to possess the skill set themselves needed to support their end users. And the support that the FAIRsFAIR project offers for data repositories can be divided into 3 types, and this division of support types will also serve as a basis for my presentation here today. So these are designing and developing features and tools, providing practical hands-on support, and assisting the development through recommendations and good practices. So the project has taken part in developing tools meant for enhancing fairness of research, as Marianne already explained, either together with some other partners or solo. So just briefly mentioning some of these tools. So first of all, FAIR Aware tool is a self-assessment tool for learning and becoming aware of requirements of FAIR. I believe that Marianne have this in her presentation for later, if I'm not correctly mistaken. And the other tool is called Fuji tool, with which one can assess the FAIR maturity levels of datasets. And I will shortly explain how we use this tool in the EOSC Nordic project for assessing the fairness levels of data repositories. Another tool that FAIRsFAIR hasn't developed but been part of in one way is the repository finder tool. It can be very useful when you want to explore FAIR repositories. So it uses the content of re3data.org, a registry of repositories, to allow you to search by topic and it lists repositories that currently are accepting data to support publication, including those that are certified and support the FAIR principles. So what FAIRsFAIR has done here is to add a few criteria to the tool, which allows you to filter out repositories that are FAIR. And the criteria are open access data, PIDs, and certified repositories. And DataCite and re3data.org are working with repositories together to make sure that the information always stays up to date. And here you can see how where to use the FAIRsFAIR add-on. So simply by clicking on the criteria set by the project, you can filter out the FAIR enabling data repositories. So this is something to remember and a quite good tip, I think, in finding the correct data repository for your type of data supporting FAIR principles. So this part of the work is all about providing support needed for the verification of repositories by discussing and designing implementation features that enable and decrease the interoperability between repositories. This will be achieved through building and testing prototypes of an interoperability layer for data repositories, and it will ultimately improve the fairness of data in repositories that enable FAIR data. The work is done with 6 developer and 6 tester repositories and with quite various levels of engagement. But as a whole, this work will enhance the overall understanding of the FAIR data standards. It will also enhance the semantic interoperability within repositories. And thirdly, it will shed a light on interoperability requirements and machine accessibility, which is a really important feature for the FAIR data principles. Here, a quick overview of the 6+6 data repositories involved in this work, just to give you an indication of the partners we are working together with. This part of the work focuses on supporting research funders, repositories, and organizations to develop their policies that to optimally support the uptake of FAIR practices. So the policy and the practice work, they go hand in hand, and we are collaboratively providing recommendations on how to enhance these and incorporate these in the research culture. There was earlier this year an open call for policy enhancement support open, where they invited expressions of interest from policymakers at all levels to work with policies to both assess their current policies against these recommendations and to consider how the policies might be adapted to better support the emergence of a FAIR ecosystem as a whole. Together with the RDA, FAIRsFAIR has been working on defining a common metadata description for semantic artifacts to make to make them FAIR. And if you're interested, you can watch recordings from 2 previous webinars held earlier this year on PIDs, metadata, and semantic interoperability. The work also includes defining the FAIR data objects and turning these into semantic artifacts as well, focusing on the metadata and requirements for machine actionability. So this machine actionability comes up here as well, as it's very important for the FAIR principles. So this was it for FAIRsFAIR. Now I'm going to go over to the other project, which is the EOSC Nordic one. So here you can see what type of activities the work package on FAIR data engages in and with whom. So the upper parts marked in blue shows the activities, and the lower parts marked in red shows the stakeholders we engage with mostly. These are divided into FAIR uptake, implementation, and policies. And I will now briefly take you through these activities one by one. So what we have done since early 2020, we have done surveyed, first of all, Nordic and Baltic data repositories, so that we could get an idea of which data repositories that are active and sort of serving data, research data mostly. So we chose a sample for research data repositories. A bit more than 100 repositories were part of this sample. So we manually selected 10 data sets per repository, making around 750 unique data objects in total. And 75 data repositories made the cut. That is, they provided globally unique, resolvable, and persistent identifiers that enabled machine actionable assessments in the first place, meaning that 24% did not provide these GUIDs at all and could not be part of the sample. And maybe worth mentioning that an average FAIR score turned out to be 24%. In this assessment. And we used the Fuji tool, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, for assessing the FAIR maturities of these data repositories. And also perhaps worth mentioning that the scores for mature and certified repositories were somewhat higher than the average. And also the ones that offered DOIs, so DataCite DOIs, and the ones that were based on a standard platform, like, for example, Dataverse, also scored somewhat higher. So here is what an Excel spreadsheet with the results might look like, just to give you an indication, where it's very small, but each letter of FAIR gets its own score here, and also a combined FAIR score. And by exposing the results to the repositories, we can improve, we can provide them with guidance on how they can improve their fairness levels. And a very important note, that these results should be seen as recommendations only and serve as encouragement and not as judgment. In addition to the FAIR assessments and community support, the project has also arranged 4 verification webinars to date on topics where repositories generally scored quite low in the assessment. The topics of past webinars have been on PIDs in November last year, making a split between data and metadata in February, generic metadata in April, and domain-specific metadata in October. And you can find the recordings and blog posts written from all of these webinars if you're interested to learn more. Additional work. So we are providing support to selected repositories on Core Trust Seal certification process, or self-assessment against the Core Trust Seal with added FAIR elements. And this CTS plus FAIR is a schema created by the FAIRsFAIR project. So we are exploring a lot of synergies with the FAIRsFAIR project as well in EOSC Nordic. We have also conducted a fairly large qualitative study on FAIR incentives during the course of this summer and autumn, where we have conducted 28 semi-structured interviews with various target groups, of which 15 were with researchers. And then we had representatives from the ministries, funders, management level personnel at universities, research support personnel, national data services, and legal advisor as well. And the next step in this work is to present the draft findings of this study in policymaker meetings. And there, the main ambition is to harmonize policies in the Nordic and Baltic countries, but also to slowly enable cultural change towards increased uptake of both FAIR and open science. So that was the last slide. So I want to thank you again for letting me present these projects. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Josephine. I don't see any questions. We shared the link, so links to what you mentioned in there, so people can look more. Can you share more when people can read these EOS Nordic reports that based on this research that we are doing?
That's a good question. So we tend to have a first draft sometime during spring. So if you mean the FAIR incentives study, so yeah, and then we will have the policymaker engagements during early summer, and we will have the final report published right before the project ends during the summer next year. So stay tuned for that, and you can check all reports and blog posts as said on eosknordic.eu website.
Okay, thank you. Again, if you later on think about the questions or comments that you want to add to, then you can just add them in the chat. I hope you all know that people should stand up at least once in an hour. So we are going into the second hour. So we'll have a 10-minute coffee break now, so you can stand up and prolong your life by standing up. So we'll meet you back in 10 minutes, so 11:20. Thank you. He's back. You managed to stand up, move around, maybe have a coffee or tea or water, and then so we can continue with the second half of the event. So first of all, I hope there are some teaching staff here too, because next presentation will be very useful for you. I'll ask Claudia Engelhardt to talk about how FAIR can be part of the curriculum and teaching. And there's a handbook about it out there. So Claudia, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Lizzie, and hello from my side to everyone. I'm happy to be here and being able to present one of the practical tools that we are or were developing in the FAIRsFAIR project. Let me share my slides. So, okay, currently you see the last one, which is not as intended. 1 second. Okay, so now you should see the title slide, and this is the presenting mode, right? Okay, so yes, the topic of my presentation is how to get FAIR into university curricula and teaching. And I'm presenting a handbook that hopefully will support higher education institutions and the different or staff in different roles there to actually realize this. So yeah, I'm Claudia Engelhardt from the University of Göttingen, or more specifically, Göttingen State and University Library, and also part of the FAIRsFAIR project. This is a brief overview of my presentation. So first, I will give you a very short summary of the work that FAIRsFAIR is doing to support universities in particular, or the higher education sector in particular, in terms of FAIR. Then I will give you an overview of the FAIR Competence Adoption Handbook. So how it came into being and the whole process behind it. And then lastly, give you an introduction to the main content. So as you learned earlier in Marianne's presentation, FAIRsFAIR has many areas of activity. And one of those is the work package called Data Science Curriculum and Professionalization, I think. What this field of activity is mainly aiming for is to support the integration of the FAIR principles or FAIR content related to the FAIR principles into university curricula and teaching. and I say training in the heading, so that's supposed to mean teaching actually, but yeah, training is also related to that. And in the past 2.5 years, we've done quite a few things in this area. So what we did first was to look at the current landscape, or the landscape of 2 years ago, in European universities in terms of the state of the integration of the FAIR principles. And so we did a survey and also focus group interviews or workshops. And one main outcome of this was that, yes, the topic of FAIR is present in the universities, or in the universities' awareness. And universities are keen to do something about it, but the actual implementation is still lagging behind. So this awareness is not like really yet reflected in the curricula and the courses that are, and the programs at the universities. And a lot of respondents also expressed the notion that, yeah, we want to do something about FAIR, but we also we are lacking a bit of guidance and practical tools. Yeah, and hopefully the project is producing tools that can help with that. So next, we designed a FAIR data competence framework for higher education and professionals to support the development of a FAIR culture and the uptake of the FAIR principles. And this is basically a sort of a high-level framework that outlines the competence groups that are related to the data steward profession in particular. Yeah. And yeah, the competences that are necessary for FAIR. And in the next step, we translated this competence framework into model curricula for university courses. And this is the task that produced the handbook that I will introduce you to you a bit later. And the aim was really to break this framework down into tools and guidance that can be used in a practical sense by people working in universities, people active in teaching and in training, to integrate FAIR into their work. And lastly, we have done and are still doing a lot of workshops and knowledge sharing activities in this field. This is an overview of the progress to date, just to highlight again the main outcomes so far and the main outcomes still to expect. So in terms of the landscaping activities, we did the survey with focus groups in addition, and the report is titled FAIR in European Higher Education. You can see the DOI here, and if you're interested, check it out later. Then another report is a briefing on FAIR competences and synergies. This is basically a report on the state of existing training initiatives, programs, courses related to FAIR and data stewardship and RDM in the wider sense at European universities. And this is also already available. The competence framework that I mentioned just a few seconds ago is also already published. And then we do have the adoption handbook. The main topic of today, which will be released in December. And then there's also a good practices report that we will also publish in December. So now coming to the handbook is titled How to be Fair with Your Research Data, a Teaching and Training Handbook for Higher University Institutions. And the main purpose of this work is to provide guidance and practical support with integrating the FAIR principles and related content into curricula and teaching. So this is really the primary purpose, but in a wider sense, this handbook will also help anyone interested in the competences and the skills that are required to implement the FAIR principles, and in tools to educate others, but also perhaps educate oneself about these topics. So it will be published in mid-September, mid-December. So we're aiming at the week before Christmas. We already have a DOI, but if you go there, there's only a table of contents that you can see already there. So next slide, huh? Why does it not go to the next slide? 1 second. So how did this handbook come into being? It was actually, it's a collaborative endeavor. We created it through a series of book sprints. So we had 6 3-hour book sprint sessions in June this year with about 35 participants from 16 countries, with a focus on Europe, but also from Canada and the United States, for example. So if you see in the background, you see a map, and if some participants put pins on the map so you can see where some of the participants are located at. And yeah, the collaborators were all experts with diverse disciplinary backgrounds, but most of them are really affiliated to universities and active in teaching and curricular planning and related activities. After the book sprint, so the book sprint created the first draft, but of course, the book was not finished then. There was a subsequent editorial process involving, it was led by an editorial team, but also still involved contributions from the book sprint participants. We had a public consultation in August and September where we invited the community to have a look at the draft, to give comments and recommendations and make suggestions. This was very well received. We really received quite a lot of feedback, which we integrated then. And we had a workshop in October where we presented the revised draft. And currently we are finalizing the handbook and we'll publish it soon. So, sorry, that was the wrong direction. Next slide is this one. So the primary target audiences of the handbook are, to put it generally, staff members of higher education institutions who are involved in the planning, organization, realization of teaching and training related to research data management and the FAIR principles. And these are people, these can be people in very different roles. So we have, of course, persons who create and teach lessons and courses in bachelor, master, PhD programs. So for example, lecturers, professors, trainers. Then we have staff who is more focused on designing, adapting, and implementing the curricula. Examples would be doctoral program managers or deans. There is staff who is more focused on training and consulting, for example, PhD students, but also early career researchers, and probably also researchers in the later stages of their development or of their career. Support staff, for example, from libraries or computing centers or research support units, but also lecturers and trainers are involved in this field. And finally, there are on different levels also people busy in implementing the FAIR principles in institutional strategies, in policies, administrative workflows, and so on. And these are really the primary audiences that the handbook is targeted at. but also, yeah, persons interested in a topic in general, as I mentioned earlier, can make use of the handbook. So for example, it can be directly, but also indirectly through the lecturers and trainers, for example, also benefit researchers and will hopefully benefit researchers and students. So here you see an overview of the content. These are the main chapters of the handbook. The first ones are grayed out because they are more or less introductory chapters, but these are really the four main thematic areas. FAIR skills and competences is the first one. Then we have a chapter with guidance about teaching and training designs for FAIR. We have another chapter with 16 FAIR lesson plans. And then finally, one chapter is dedicated to the question, oh, how do I implement or make use of the knowledge in the lesson plans in chapter 5 and actually implement FAIR at my institution. Yeah, let's just in the last part briefly go into or have a closer look at these four areas. So in the FAIR skills and competences chapter, we suggest FAIR competence profiles, which basically break down the competence framework and say, okay, for the bachelor, master, and doctoral level, you need these skills and competences at this specific level. And we define learning outcomes also for the bachelor, master, and doctoral level. What does this look like? So here you see a part of the table with the competence profiles for the bachelor, master, doctoral level. So we have here the topics. So for example, general principles and concepts in data management overview. And the required level for bachelor students would be basic, for the master level intermediate, and for the PhD advanced. And we also state if this is deemed entry level content or not. And this is the competence profiles that we suggest here are generic or for all disciplines or discipline agnostic, so to speak, and may require for certain disciplines adaptations in some topics. So for example, when it comes to sensitive data, this is, of course, a much more important topic for the social sciences or for the medical sciences than for astrophysics, for example. And in the next slide, let's go to the learning outcomes. So you see here again in the left column, the topics that also appeared in the competence table that I just showed you now. And then this is for the PhD level, the required level. And here you can see, okay, what are the concrete learning outcomes? What is a student able to do after attending a course on this topic or after attending a unit on this topic? So this really concretely says, okay, this person can define what research data management is and describe the relevance and benefits. So teaching and training designs, there we guide you through the phases of course design, basically, yeah, describe what this is all about and what one should pay attention to. So the different steps are selecting or identifying learning outcomes, then selecting or developing learning experience, describing or meaning different forms of teaching. So for example, a lecture, a seminar, a workshop, a hands-on activity. Then there are some notes about selecting content. And another important topic, identifying and developing assessments to see if the learning outcomes or to check if the learning outcomes have been reached. And evaluate course effectiveness. Let's now have a brief look. Ooh, and I only have 2 minutes left. I'm gonna try not to waste time. So this is the chapter on lesson plans. We created lesson plans for 16 topics. And these are really designed as practical tools that teachers or trainers can take to develop a course or unit on a specific topic. So you can take the lesson plan on one specific topic and plug it into an existing course, for example, or you can take a few of these lesson plans and design a course from these, guided by the competence profiles and learning outcomes, or a workshop. So there are different ways that you can use these. In the workshop that we had in October, we asked the participants, what do you think are existing courses in your context that, for example, these lesson plans or such topics could be plugged into? And there were not only the obvious candidates like existing RDM courses or data literacy or information literacy courses, but also, for example, people said, okay, I could well see that this could be a topic in a PhD onboarding course or graduate school introduction week, research methodology courses, data analysis or statistics courses, IT related courses, or basically any course or activity where students create and collect their own data, where this could be integrated. I quickly wanted to show you, can I start, my time is over. Can I have an additional 2 minutes or so, Lizzie? Would that be okay? Thank you. I wanted to show you, but I have to leave the presentation quickly, what such a lesson plan looks like. So they all follow the same structure, or we try to have them follow the same structure. Here you have the FAIR elements and how the topic relates to the FAIR elements and why this is important. Then learning objectives. And then a summary of tasks and actions that instructors can follow to teach this topic. Yes? You can't see it?
Yeah, you have to share what you're showing. So you would have to go out from the presentation and share the website, if that's what you're showing right now.
Okay, I share my whole screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, we see it now.
Okay, great. Okay, so lesson plan, this is the one on data access. So here at the beginning, the relevant FAIR elements and why it is relevant. Specifies the primary audience, learning objectives, and the summary of tasks and actions here. And then which materials or equipment are necessary to teach this unit. References, where you can find more information on the topics mentioned earlier, and take-home tasks. Okay, back to the presentation. I am back in the presentation right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so lastly, chapter on implementing FAIR. What are we talking about there? Policies, of course. How do you get FAIR into policies? Data management, planning, data processing, documentation, support infrastructure, data publication, and data reuse. And that's it. Just the take-home message. So yeah, so FAIR is a new topic. Universities are required to put this into the curricula and teaching on top of all the other stuff that's already there, which might seem like a difficult and challenging task at first. But we think if you break it down into individual topics and practical things to do, then FAIR bits and topics can really be plugged into a variety of existing courses. And then it's probably not such a huge task after all. So thank you very much. And sorry for the for running late.
Thank you, Claudia. So do you understand correctly, all these materials are free and anybody who wants to can use it?
Yes, it's licensed with CC BY and will be freely available on Zenodo. We will also have then in the next year a book publication, and we are planning to transform the content or transfer it into a Git book as well, which will be easier to further develop by future volunteers, hopefully.
Okay.
At some point. Thanks. And yeah, I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions, but if anybody has questions, then please raise your hand, write it in the chat, and we can take it from there. But before we move on to the next presentation, let's look at the Menti again. I think Mariam will share a couple of new questions with us. I'll add the code here again. Oh, it came already. So we have a couple of more questions coming. Mariam?
Yes, welcome. So moving from the question about the suitable data repository, this is the next one. What aspects of FAIR do you find hardest to achieve?
Mariam, can you share the screen so that...
Okay. I am not screen sharing, I realize. Sorry about that. Let's find the right screen. So are you now seeing the output? Yeah, okay, good. Sorry about that. Okay, a lot of interoperability, yeah. When we made the Mentimeter poll, I was considering if this should be an open question or just checkbox question, because interoperability is often seen as the hardest one. But ontologies is also a very relevant one. Yeah, there are many and they are different within disciplines, and especially when you want to work cross-disciplinary, it can be very challenging to know which ones are relevant. Metadata and metadata standards, everything is clear. That is a great response to. The findability aspects are also perceived as hard. Yeah, I guess we still have a lot to do, right? Let's see, we have 11 responses now. Pretty consistent, I would say. Okay. I think I'll move on to the next question. The actual fairness of a data set, have you ever checked that? A couple of people who have done that. But most of you not yet, so it seems. Okay. This is, of course, the bridge that I wanted to have. I better stop share and re-share the other screen because thank you so much for this. And let me then share some slides with you. Okay, because this is about assessing the fairness of data sets, actually. And not just for the sake of assessing, but for the sake of improving the fairness of data. My colleague Maaike Verburg works on that tool. Josephine already mentioned it. So she is not here today, but should certainly be acknowledged. That's why she is here on the slide as well. My question, or one of the things I like to consider, is about this gradual notion of fairness, because I think many of you will know it is not either fair or not fair. It's somewhere in between often. So data can be very findable, but perhaps not accessible, or maybe they are accessible, but their interoperability is not great yet, because interoperability, speaking the same language in a sense, is pretty hard to achieve. So that means the resulting reusability is then not perfect either, probably. So I think it is kind of a moving target for this, for these three reasons you see here. It is a matter of degree. And when we start assessing the fairness of a data set, or perhaps the fairness of the data sets in a repository, that is always a snapshot in time. It can be, the fairness can improve, for instance, when metadata are being enriched, or when file formats that are very proprietary, let's say Microsoft files, are transformed into more open formats that will increase the interoperability, and then the overall fairness level of that data set also increases. So that's what I mean with a snapshot in time. We saw it in the workshop I mentioned earlier. And one of the things also expressed in one of the earlier synchronization force workshops was the concern about metrics, and in particular the risk that people will interpret the outcome of a metric as, let's say, as a fact, as something speaking for itself, which is often not the case, because any assessment, or the quality of an assessment and the interpretation of an assessment, depends on the quality and the interpretation of the underlying embedded metrics. So what do we actually measure, and what does it mean? And hence, as a kind of warning, all tools that will give a measure or a number or a scoring rank, they all need a narrative and a context. Whether we call it fair tools, fair assessment, or fair metrics, we are always talking about evaluating a certain degree of fairness. Either the fairness of data you produced yourself, or the fairness of data that others produced, for instance, when you are considering to reuse existing data. And these types of assessments and evaluations can place at different stages in the research data lifecycle. Let me give two examples of stages that we worked on in FAIRsFAIR. When you consider the state of data publication, so that is pretty much when the research part and research period has finished, the data are in a repository and they can be found through a catalog probably. We took that as a kind of deciding point, and we developed two types of assessment tools. Josephine mentioned them already, and then explored more the Fuji type of measuring the fairness of data in repositories. That is, of course, after the data publication. The one I'm going to mention here is FAIRsFAIR, and that is for the period leading up to depositing it in repositories and publishing it. You can even use the tool when you write a data management plan, but originally we thought, okay, this could be useful when people want to do a final check before they deposit the data in a repository. So how can they make the data more fair? And the Fair Aware tool is then really, as the name says, it's a tool for raising awareness to educate oneself or perhaps others. It consists of 10 questions. We think they are simple. And it's always interesting to find out from you if you consider them simple. There is a lot of guidance in the tool. The tool also allows you to leave feedback so we can improve it. We recently did an overhaul, both in the look and feel, but more importantly in the guidance that we provide. And the tool then gives you back a kind of fair assessment score. As I said, there's always a narrative behind the score, but it may be an indication for you what you could improve perhaps on the fairness of the set, with the goal to create more fair data. And in the end, we would be pleased if you do a bit of the promotion for us as well, if you like the tool and think it's useful. So time for a hands-on exercise, because right now, since early in this morning, we have been talking to you, but now it's time for you to take 10 minutes and explore this tool by yourself. I would ask you to think of a data set you are familiar with. If you don't have a data set of your own, there is one example here. And then the next step is go to this Fair Aware address. If someone from the team could please put it in the chat, I think it's just appearing there. And then have a kind of overview look of the tool, check the fairness of your data set. With just a small remark, if you use someone else's data set that has already been deposited in a repository, the questions are not so much, are you aware that so-and-so, but of course, do you think that the original data creator was aware? It may feel a bit strange, but I'm just leaving you 10 minutes on your own and we'll be silent, and I think we can stop the recording. When you have any questions in the meantime, please use the chat. Afterwards, we hope to hear back from you if you think this is a sensible tool and if you could use it or promote it. Thank you for that question in the chat about long-term commitment. Does it also imply that if you make data public via public repository, that you should at least store the metadata privately as well? Oh, this is my alarm you hear, so sorry. That is a good question. It certainly won't hurt, but maybe in practice, it is more likely that one's individual storage gets disrupted or corrupted or outdated than that the repository is discontinued. So, of course, that's not a guarantee that every repository will be along forever. Those who go up for certification as being trustworthy will have a continuity plan in place and will have explicit arrangements in case they will be discontinued. So that's always one of the reasons why the trustworthy ones, the certified ones, are recommended. But like I said, it certainly won't harm if you keep information yourself. But yeah, individuals are also not very sustainable, put it that way. I think we are about in the 10 minutes part. Can I ask you to come back? I hope you liked this first glimpse of the tool. I guess for many of you, it was the first glimpse. Also, with an eye on time, I would ask you to put any ideas you have, for instance, ratings, how useful you find the tool for yourself or perhaps for the reviewers, the researchers and students you're coaching and supporting. Do you like it? Would you use it in future or recommend it? I'd ask you to put your feedback in the chat. Let's skip Mentimeter for a moment. And thank you for this. And then I hand back to Lizzie.
Yes, thank you, Marianne. So please, everybody, yes, just put the number in the in the chat, as Marianne asked you to do. So it will be interesting to see how you found the tool. And we can move on now to our last presentation, which is presented by Birgit Schmidt from Göttingen University. Again, Tartu University is part of also the Enlightened Alliance, and so is Göttingen University, and Birgit will give us an overview what this alliance can again do and how this can be helpful. So Birgit, the floor is yours.
So thank you and hello. It's a pleasure to speak to you about these activities. Let me share my screen. So you should see the slides now, but not in presenter mode yet. Hopefully, does it look good? Yes. Presenter mode.
It's still on the, so that we can see all the slides at once. It's not.
How do I do this? Is this the swap displays? I think so. Yes. Is it looking good now for you all?
Still the same.
Still the same. Maybe I should stop the mirroring of this screens. No, it's not mirroring. Maybe let me stop share the slide for a moment, and it should work now, because it's always when you have these two screens and it's messing everything up in terms of the presenter mode, but it's not.
Yeah, it's good now.
Oh, it should be fine because it's discarded my other screen. So, okay, yeah. I'm going to speak about activities in the Enlightened University Alliance and focusing on FAIR, so a kind of reality check in terms of where we are, but this is early stages of the project actually, as this has only started one part, which is the Alliance, which is the mothership of the exercise. Enlight has started last year, and the satellite project I'm talking about has started only in September this year. So you are likely aware that there is additional funding on the table from the Commission in terms of Erasmus funds to integrate campuses. And in addition, these universities were invited to apply for additional funds for creating joint research and innovation agendas. And these typically include transformative modules on sharing research infrastructure, mainstreaming open science, and things like that. So in the Alliance, Tartu and Göttingen are involved in is the Enlightened Alliance, and this is 9 universities, University of Basque Country, Bordeaux, Comenius University, National University of Ireland, Ghent University, Groningen, and Uppsala, plus the 2 I have just mentioned. And they have, of course, their own goals in terms of integrating teaching and learning activities. And what we do in the satellite project, which is Enlight Rise, we look into open science, increasing incentives, thinking about digital infrastructures, but also topics like civil society engagement, which is then closer in a way to the teaching and learning activities, and also early career development. And also thinking, of course, about future projects together. So, and the 2 aspects I'd like to concentrate on, I'd like to mention the research infrastructure exercise, which is one work package which looks into looking what's there, digital infrastructures, what are the opportunities in terms of integrating with the EOS. And this, of course, will not start from scratch, but build on former projects like the regional projects, which have been mentioned, like EOS Nordic, EOS Pillar, and so on. But get an overview of what's there on the 9 campuses, of course. And also, looking into AI indexes, which is about responsibilities when you work with big data sets. So some fancy topics there as well. So, and when it comes to open science, the aim is, of course, to work towards a joint vision, some kind of joint shared principles, and stepping up some support for open science, very practical measures. I have not listed them here. So we aim to create a network of ambassadors, also webinar series, guidance, kind of a handbook thing. But this is in the future. You will hopefully hear about this in the next couple of months again. And of course, the main idea here is to increase step up incentives for an open science culture at the university level. So, and we are in a stage of a scoping exercise, knowing each other from former projects partly, but also a couple of new institutions there, which have been working likely in other contexts. So, and I have, we have a questionnaire from the research infrastructure strand of work, and are working on kind of a survey questionnaire on open science broadly. But as a first step, I thought, well, let's have a look at the FAIR aspects first, which is then, of course, a core element in terms of the research data management activities of the university. I mean, you have heard a good deal about FAIR today. It's all about the research cycle, and of course, not only meant to put this into a repository, but also to enable reuse. And for this, there's lots of actions at the university level to be taken, and we wanted to get a kind of a snapshot at this stage of what we already have in place and what's missing or what people are working on. So, and of course, I had again a look at this report, which has been mentioned, the Turning FAIR into Practice report, which highlights in particular these three areas in terms of the technical ecosystem as an enabler of FAIR, and of course the cultural aspect, the human who has to kind of implement it. What is to be done at the researcher level is often through policies. You put in some recommendations or mandates in terms of what is expected in terms of data management. Nowadays, often arriving from different routes, say research integrity policies, but also, of course, data policies. And yeah, the roles of support staff are also changing in terms of we have research data managers often in place, and new roles like data stewards are emerging in several institutions, but it's not a common thing yet. I mean, and in terms of skills and capacity building, colleagues have, of course, certain measures in place, and I give you some figures on this in a moment. So in terms of policies, we have this 9 partner universities, 4 have a policy already in place. Not very old, since a few years most of the time, and then 3 further policies are under development, and 2 institutions haven't started to create a policy yet for different reasons. And in terms of has FAIR arrived in these policies, there are like a third of these institutions have already plugged it in a way in the policy, or another third is planning to integrate it in a future revision of the policy. And for those, of course, which are under development, it's very likely that these institutions take this into account when creating the policy. And of course, you could also say, well, it's kind of addressed because the aspects of FAIR are addressed implicitly in the policy without mentioning it, because the term came up a bit later. So yeah, so, and in terms of data sharing and open data, it's quite, as you can see, quite a few institutions out of our 9 partners have already some, maybe not in this exact words, but referring to the European Commission's motto of reading FAIR as open as possible, as close as necessary. You know, open and FAIR is not the same thing, has some overlap, but openness is kind of the advanced goal at some stage, perhaps, for the data. And data sharing is encouraged in quite a few of these policies, and openness with some reservations, and also pointers, of course, to regulations, restrictions in terms of sharing. This was not an explicit part in this question, so the last line here is basically one comment which was added under the other. So yeah, in terms of the actual services which are in place, so I have here differentiated by if there is a policy in place or not. So the orange is there is no policy, yellow is under development, blue is there is a policy, and you can see the ones who have a policy in place are a bit more spread across all the types of RDM services you could create for like making this a reality in your institution, but also quite a good deal of the others where the policy is under development or even not existing at all are engaging in these areas. And from former surveys, we also know most institutions start, of course, with consultancy, online information resources, and then step into more tangible commitments in terms of, say, setting up a repository or licensing some hosting service or stepping into training, which you can see is a little bit more prominent also in institutions where a policy is already in place. So, and with this, of course, you need some stuff to actually roll this out. And again, you can see when there is a policy, there's a bit broader spread in terms of the roles which are already in place. Also, to have accomplished to have these data stewards in place. And more commonly, of course, are the roles which are longer in existence, the job titles of data managers or data librarians or data repository managers, which is more the infrastructure or technical role. And yeah, and with these, again, you can put some more more action, take more action in terms of training if there is stuff in terms of support roles, then institutions can engage in these areas. But again, you see it's from all types of, if there's a policy or not, people start doing it. So, and the same holds with a less strong degree for the other areas. And of course, yeah, it's getting a bit thinner when it comes to, let's say, training of data managers and stewards. If you don't have any, then it's a bit of this road, and it does not fit so well. But also engagement in national networks was mentioned quite a few times, which of course is then also a way of stepping up knowledge of stuff and sharing tools. RDA is the Research Data Alliance, which some of you might be familiar with, which was also mentioned in the presentation of the FAIRsFAIR colleagues, I guess. So, and just a few examples. So worth to look at, of course. I mean, one example is the policy of Groningen, which was recently revised. They kind of reviewed this very thoroughly based on the revisions in their national policies, research integrity, national plan on open science, and also the European Commission Horizon Europe policy, and plugged in FAIR as a mandatory aspect of the policy now. And yeah, have a look. I put this into the references in terms of an example services. In Göttingen, we have center. I mean, others are setting up these centers as well. Groningen, for example, has a competence center in the making. And you can, of course, set up services. We are in Göttingen working jointly, the library, the IT center, and the University Medical Center, and a suite of services, including consultancy, but also Göttingen Research Online, which is the umbrella of database repository. We have a data management planning tool. But of course, again, it's then a question of what's the uptake. I mean, is it used? And I would say, well, not heavily, because it's often, of course, treated as this is my last resort, or some say, okay, it's fine to use this repository for my data. So, and finally, I'd like to point to an example from the University of Ghent, they have set up a network of data stewards, and this works very much like a network. Of course, there is some central coordination, some coordinator, and these data stewards are embedded and have a strong link to the faculties, and they have clustered the faculties, and their main role is to raise awareness, point to RDM infrastructures, monitor and shape the RDM policies also on the level of the disciplines, which is in some institutions becoming stronger. So Groningen also has this approach of saying like the responsibilities are very shared. There's some central, there's some infrastructure, and there's some faculty responsibility, and they have to kind of shape this for their needs. So, and that's basically the part which is kind of what we have explored so far, and of course we'll dig deeper. But we also in this questionnaires mentioned some challenges around FAIR, which goes broadly in the sense of course also the aspects of collaboration, coordination, both at the institutional level, but also nationally. There are sometimes in some countries, there are programs to bring this large consortia together or institutions, but there's still a bit of a lack of sustaining of such coordinations as well. And then, of course, the resource question has been mentioned already. You know, it's always a bit of a struggle to get the resources in terms of staff and the infrastructure, and also then setting up policies or balancing data protection and openness. Quite a few things have been mentioned here. And last but not least, of course, it's also a question of training and benefits and incentives for researchers, which is about understanding it fully and what it has to be done, but also in terms of recognition or rewards, or if your institution has some assessment procedure or national even in place to kind of recognize these actions in terms of both the CVs, selection process, and the assessment procedures. So that's basically it. And I look forward to exploring further with the Enlight network in terms of we have quite a bit of work ahead. And I'm sure we can achieve more as a group. A flock of birds, it's only 8, should be 9, couldn't find the right picture. But yeah, that's the message from my side, and happy to have your questions if you have any, or comments, or what works for you. So let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Birgit, especially for the fun picture in the end. But so can you mention really quickly what are a couple of the practical things that will come out from the Enlight Rise after this project is over?
Yeah, so in a way, of course, we will kind of maintain this kind of where we are. This will also a bit monitored from the side of the European Commission. They are currently evaluating or assessing what's the state for the first wave of the university alliances. So in this way, we have our own motivation in terms of getting to know each other better, but also some external incentive in because it's an instrument, of course, for the Commission, but also we use it as an instrument for us to see what good practices are there, which is often, of course, something you have to dig out. I mean, you know, in Groningen, I noticed that they plugged it into the policy now. So the sharing of what works is one aspect. And also in terms of often the policies sit a bit aside and you point to them when you promote the practices, but it's not a lived exercise necessarily. And what I mean, in terms of the practical things we have in the work package, it's first of all, we create a network of ambassadors or some voices, researchers to speak to researchers about open science, and we will likely use them also for webinars to highlight certain discussions, topics which are very relevant, like not just data management, but also data reuse, sharing, reproducibility, open access aspects or changes in the scholarly communication culture, like open peer review and so on. This is all a long tail of things we could explore together if there's interest in terms of having such a discussion, but of course also in terms of what's the strategic embedding of these policies, which is not so prominent in countries where you don't have an open science plan or such a thing, which is, and even if there's such a plan, it's not necessarily a requirement to have a institutional open science roadmap policy necessarily, and maybe you don't need it because it's kind of spread across different policies, and if they're well connected and people are taking care. So it's yeah, other practical things. Tartu will be responsible for creating a guide, so for getting started with open science activities on campus with a focus on open access, research data management, public engagement, which are core topics in Enlight. Yeah, and yeah, a few other things certainly. So.
Thank you. So if anybody has a question now, please raise your hand or write it in the chat. And until then, I will give the floor to Marianne, who will give us the takeaway part of the event now.
Thank you again, Lizzie. Yes, for the takeaway, we have just one final question for you in Mentimeter. So if you can return it there. I think you all know the code now by name, by heart. All presenters, and the code is in the chat for those who need it. All presenters shared their take-home message ahead of this event. You see them all here. You've seen some of them in the presentation as well. Can I ask you to click on the message that you will take home to work on or to share with your colleagues? So this event is not just finished in a few minutes, but has some future you practicing these messages. Okay, 14 so far. I think we should at least reach the 22 we had earlier. It's a bit like a countdown because I know we're also nearing the end of this session. Might want I just leave this open for a while and I hand back to Lizzie.
Yes, thank you very much. So we have reached the end of the program. The time went by really quickly in my mind. So I want to thank you, FAIRsFAIR, for coming to Estonia, Marianne and Sarah for all the work and help that you did. Thank you, Birgit, Anne, Claudia, Josephine, for your presentations and your takeaways and the support. So FAIRsFAIR is promoting their event And I will promote our events. We always do something, and if you want to know what's going on in open science field and in Estonia, then please subscribe to the open science mailing list that we are holding here in the University of Tartu Library. You can find the subscription link in the chat. And I thank everybody for participating, and I'm hoping to see you soon in our next event. So, FAIRsFAIR, you want to add something?
Thanks, Lizzie. Thanks, everybody. It was really a really interesting, well-organized event. So congratulations. No, I just close by saying that it's not all done yet, and that's why I'm showcasing this invitation to book your time for the final event that we are organizing in January. It will most likely be a virtual event, but we learned that this has positive effects as well. And that's where we'll take a final debate on all the things that's been discussed today and much more. And maybe the very last one, so in December, the FAIRsFAIR white paper will also be available, will be published. It's a short document that will include a set of recommendations that we believe are still lacking in the European open science panorama that we have today. And there is at least one that relates to, in particular, training and education aspects. So a reason more for all of you to stay tuned and read and comment that. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks to the speakers. It was a pleasure to visit Estonia and to meet you all.
Thank you, and welcome back, and see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.